want you to ask yourself the question, are you a leader? To answer it, you've got to think about what leadership means to you. And many of us have picked up some very unfortunate and not so positive notions of what leadership is. For some people, we believe that there are two categories of people in the world, leaders and non-leaders. And if you think of the world as being divided up this way, you probably think of yourself as being in the non-leader category. Some people, when they imagine what they think of a leader as being, they imagine an oppressive leader, like a dictator or a cult leader. This, of course, is not really leadership, it's domination, but it's the model that a lot of people have of what a leader is. And some people think of leadership as being something that only exists in particular domains. It's not something you think of in most of life, but maybe you have learned something about business management and you think that leadership is something that just occurs in business. Now, all of these models of leadership are unfortunate and limited, because really, leadership is something that belongs to all of us. Everyone can be a leader and everyone needs to be a leader. Becoming a leader is an essential part of your personal growth and development. And when I'm talking about leadership, I'm talking about true creative leadership, not power over through domination. In order to think about what it means to become a leader, there are three ways of thinking about what leadership is that I find particularly helpful. The first of these is that leadership is an attitude. Rather than leadership being a role that you take on, say in a hierarchical organization or a community, leadership is a way of approaching life so that everything you encounter in life becomes a potential opportunity to lead. I'm reminded of a story that was told by one of the founders of the Omega Institute for Holistic Studies, Stefan Rechtschaffen. He talked about how he was walking down the path one day and he saw a piece of trash and he bent down to pick it up. And as he was standing up, someone coming the other way down the path said, "Oh, you must be the president," which in fact he was. He was the president of Omega at the time. You have to be the president to think, oh, there's a piece of litter here. If I don't see to it that the litter gets picked up, who will? In fact, there's a definition of leadership that I really like that comes from Harvey Jackins, the creator of reevaluation counseling, where he says that leadership is seeing to it that everything you come into contact with goes well. Everything you come into contact with. That's the attitude of leadership. It's one of the reasons why I train people to be counselors, because when people become counselors, when they encounter people around them who are struggling or suffering or stuck in relationships, they think, if I don't see to it that this person heals or grows or has a chance of getting free, who will? And so they apply themselves to the question of, how do I support or facilitate change for this person? And that's what leadership is. Now, it doesn't mean that you have to pick up the trash yourself. It may be that you pick up the litter, or you make sure that somebody else does it, or inspire somebody else to do it, or figure out how to create a world where people don't drop trash on the ground, or where people don't even have things that they could drop on the ground. There are many approaches to solving any particular leadership problem, but the attitude of leadership is one where you see opportunities for leadership everywhere you go. And this brings me to the second way of thinking about leadership that I believe to be helpful, which is that leadership is the natural outcome of reclaiming power. Power is the ability to reshape the world to make it more how you believe it ought to be. When you go from feeling relatively powerless and acting relatively powerlessly to realizing how much power you actually have to influence the world around you, you start to see the world differently. You really start to see more opportunities to make things different. Everywhere you go, you look at things and you think, how could this be better? How could this change? And you think about that in relation to yourself, to other people around you in your life, and to the communities that you're part of, the institutions that you're part of, and the world around you. You ask this question all the time, and you try to figure out, what could you do to try to make things different? There's a wonderful quote from Buckminster Fuller, who says that you never create change by fighting the existing reality. To change something, build a new model that makes the existing reality obsolete. Now, this is creative leadership. It requires real creativity. When you want something to be different, you don't necessarily fight the way things are. If the educational system or some way of learning something that exists in the world doesn't make sense to you, educational reform is an option. It often involves fighting the existing reality. But you don't have to reform things. You can just come up with a new way of educating, and if it takes hold, it will eventually override the existing reality and make it obsolete. That's what real creative leadership is. A third way of thinking about what leadership is that I find helpful in thinking about leadership in your own personal growth and development is that leadership is, in fact, a developmental stage. If you think about anything that you have developed as a capacity in your life, something that you learned to do that you couldn't do before, you always can immediately lead as soon as you learn something new. Say you're learning a martial art and there's some new move that you learn. And then the person next to you who's trying to learn it doesn't quite have it right. Well, if you've got it right, you can help them get it right too. That's already leadership. Eventually, when you start to master it, you can teach it to other people in a more systematic way. That's a way to lead in a particular domain where you've learned something and now you have something to offer the world, to contribute to it that you didn't have before. But leadership as a developmental stage also occurs in a kind of global way, where you start to just be a person who leads in the world wherever it is that you go, in whatever it is that you do. Now, when I train people to be counselors, I emphasize this point, that if your clients are not leading in the world in some way that is appropriate to them and what they care about, then you've got some work to do, either helping them to reclaim power or helping them to develop in such a way that they realize that they have the right to create change and the capacity to create change. That is leadership as a developmental stage. It's necessary for people not only because it makes the world better, but because it makes their lives better. Everyone needs to contribute, and people get a sense of meaning in life when they figure out how to give their gifts to the world and make things better. James Hillman, in his wonderful book, We've Had 100 Years of Psychotherapy and the World's Getting Worse, talks about how psychotherapy and counseling can be used to generate compliance. Someone is living in a world that really doesn't make sense, and you just help them feel better about it so they can function within it. But that's not the only way this can go. Counseling and counseling sessions can become like a cell of revolution, where you help people recognize that part of the reason they feel so bad is because things around them are bad, and that working to change those things actually makes them feel better and makes the world better. It makes them feel better because they're living in more of the world they wish to live in. So it's essential for the world and for people as individuals for them to lead. It's part of counseling to help people become leaders. Now, as you've been listening to this, I'm hoping that you've been thinking about this question, are you a leader? And really, the answer to the question is yes, provided you take on this attitude of leadership, recognize that reclaiming power is a part of your work, and that there's a developmental stage that if you're not in, you can make your way to. That means that you're thinking about what are all the ways that you can lead in the world? What are the things that you encounter in your day-to-day life that you wish were different or that you know could be better, that you could see to it that those things go better than they do? Now, one of the reasons why I teach interchange and train people to be counselors is that I believe counseling to be an integral form of leadership. And this is important because to be a leader, you don't have to be an activist or a politician or an inventor or a manager. You can lead as a parent, as a teacher, as an artist, as someone who tries to make the world around you better and the lives of the people who you touch better, even if that's one at a time. Counseling is integral to this. And so I believe that anybody who wants to be a leader also needs to be a counselor. We need to understand how to create change for people, how to help make that change possible, and to practice it and get good at it, so that when we see people around us in the world who we wish could have better lives, we know how to help make that happen. So, are you a leader?